Under 20 years of shared dreams, my world crumbled in one devastating moment. I sat frozen, a trembling note in hand as the truth emerged. My wife had left me for my coworker, shattering every cherished memory. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, igniting a storm of anguish and disbelief. In that raw, unbearable instant, my heart fractured into irreparable pieces. The ensuing silence was suffocating, each moment echoing the loss of a once vibrant life. Unbeknownst to me, this dark chapter was only beginning, and fate was poised to deliver a cruel twist of irony beyond all rational expectation. For 2 decades, I had believed our life together was unshakable, a fortress built on years of laughter, shared struggles, and quiet moments of hope. I still remember the day we said our vows, the bright smiles, the promises whispered under the gentle glow of a summer sunset, and the unspoken pledge to weather any storm together. We built our world slowly and deliberately, brick by brick. A modest home filled with the aroma of Sunday dinners, the excited chaos of family gatherings, and long nights spent confiding our dreams and fears. I never imagined that the foundation of that life would one day crumble under the weight of betrayal. The unraveling began with subtle signs that, at the time, I dismissed as the inevitable ebb and flow of long-term commitment. My wife grew distant, her laughter, once warm and inviting, now tinged with an elusive sadness. I chalked it up to the pressures of work and the monotony that can sometimes settle in after years of routine. But then, little by little, discrepancies emerged. A missed phone call here, an unexplained late night there. Each anomaly was a small, almost imperceptible crack in the facade of our shared life. One chilly autumn evening, as rain pattered against our window, I found myself alone in our living room, staring at our family photographs that lined the mantel. The images of happier times, vacations on sun-drenched beaches, cozy winter nights by the fire, and quiet smiles on our wedding day, now felt like relics of another lifetime. It was in that reflective solitude that I discovered an email tucked away on her laptop, its subject line innocuous yet its content explosive. The messages were laden with tender words and secret plans, addressed not to me but to someone I had once considered a friend, a coworker whose name now burned like a brand on my soul. The moment I realized what I had uncovered, time itself seemed to distort. My hands trembled as I read every line, each word a dagger that pierced deeper than the last. I remember the numb shock that overtook me, the world blurring into a haze of disbelief and grief. I felt betrayed not only by the woman I loved but also by the man I had trusted implicitly in our workplace. The familiarity of his friendly smiles, his casual conversations during coffee breaks, now reeked of duplicity and deceit. I felt utterly alone, marooned on an island of heartbreak amid a sea of memories that had once promised endless love. Confrontation was inevitable, and it came on a night when the weight of silence became too oppressive to bear. I approached her in our dimly lit kitchen, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice raw with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. Her eyes, red and glassy from unshed tears, searched mine for an answer. She muttered something about feeling neglected and unfulfilled, words that, though painful, seemed more like feeble justifications than honest confessions. In that moment, I realized that everything I had known about our marriage was a carefully constructed illusion, now shattered beyond repair. The days that followed were a tumult of emotions. I drifted through a fog of anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I found solace in solitude, seeking refuge in the quiet corners of our empty home where every object whispered memories of a shared past. I tried to piece together the fragments of my identity, attending therapy sessions and jotting down thoughts in a battered journal. Each word I wrote was a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless, to rebuild myself from the ruins of a love that had once defined me. Yet, despite these efforts, the bitterness of betrayal clung to me like a relentless shadow. I even began to question my own worth. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the signs, the subtle hints of deception? I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for the point where trust had been irrevocably broken. I visited the places we once frequented, the quiet cafe on the corner where we had planned our future, the park where our laughter had mingled with the rustling leaves, and each step was a painful reminder of what I had lost. The echo of our shared dreams, now silenced by betrayal, haunted me relentlessly. Then, as if fate had one more cruel twist in store, months after the devastation had settled into a dull, persistent ache, my phone rang on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be startled by a ringing phone, its sound now foreign amidst the silence I had grown accustomed to. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize at first. My heart pounded as I hesitated, knowing that the call could either be an unwelcome reminder or the beginning of an even more complicated chapter in this saga of betrayal. With a deep, reluctant breath, I answered. The voice that greeted me was unmistakable, hoarse and edged with desperation. It was him, the coworker, the man who had once shared my office space and my trust, now reduced to pleading for assistance. "I need your help," he said, his words coming out in a shaky whisper, as if he were confessing a deep, hidden regret. In that moment, every emotion I had been nursing, anger, hurt, disbelief, collided into an overwhelming mixture of shock and a reluctant pity I couldn't quite understand. How could I possibly process this? Here was the man who had helped orchestrate the downfall of my marriage, now on the other end of the line, voice trembling with a vulnerability I had never seen before. I could hardly believe it. For a few agonizing moments, I sat in stunned silence, the sound of his voice echoing in the recesses of my mind. The call wasn't just a simple plea for help, it was a summons from a ghost of my past, a reminder that some betrayals never truly fade away. In the days that followed that call, I found myself spiraling into an inner conflict. Every fiber of my being rebelled at the thought of helping the man who had been so intimately entwined with my deepest pain. Yet, beneath the layers of anger and betrayal, a small, almost imperceptible part of me wondered if perhaps there was more to his plea than simple remorse. Was it guilt that drove him? Or had his own life unraveled in the wake of the choices he made? The irony was crushing. The man who had torn apart my life now reached out for help, as if seeking redemption from the ruins he had helped create. I spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with these questions. I questioned my capacity for forgiveness and whether it was even possible to salvage any semblance of dignity after such profound betrayal. I began to document every memory, both the sweet and the bitter, in a desperate attempt to understand where everything had gone wrong. I visited old haunts, reread old letters, and sat for hours in silence, letting the memories wash over me like relentless waves. With each recollection, I was forced to confront the reality that the betrayal had not only destroyed a marriage but had also unmoored the very foundation of my self-worth. And yet, in the midst of all this inner turmoil, the call remained a persistent echo, a stark reminder that the past was not done with me yet. Its presence was both a wound and a potential turning point. The thought of helping him, of facing the man who had once been my coworker and friend, filled me with dread and a strange, unbidden curiosity. I found myself asking, could I ever bridge the chasm of betrayal, or was this call just another cruel twist in a story that had already lost its way? Now, as I sit here in the quiet of my small apartment, surrounded by the tangible remnants of a life that once was, I am left with more questions than answers. The call has unsettled the fragile peace I was beginning to forge in the aftermath of heartbreak. It has forced me to reckon with a past that I thought I had finally begun to bury. The voice on the phone, laden with desperation and regret, serves as a harbinger of the complex, painful journey that lies ahead. I stare at the phone long after the call has ended, its screen dark and silent, much like the part of my heart that still aches from the betrayal. I know that the coming days will force me to confront not only the man who wronged me but also the very nature of forgiveness, redemption, and whether it is ever possible to rebuild one's life from such ruins. The unanswered plea echoes in my mind, a challenge, a question, and perhaps, a desperate invitation to look beyond the bitterness and pain. This is where my story pauses, a moment suspended between the shattered past and an uncertain future. The call has reopened wounds I had begun to mend, and I stand at the precipice of a choice that could forever alter the course of my life. In the silence of that pivotal moment, I am left to wonder, how do you help the man who once broke you? And can the seeds of forgiveness ever take root in a heart scarred by betrayal? As the ringing phone echoed in the dead of night, a mix of disbelief and reluctant pity surged within me. The voice on the line, hoarse, trembling, and saturated with regret, belonged to the man who had torn my life apart. In that haunting moment, I felt the old wounds of betrayal reopen, the scars of 20 years of shared dreams pulsing with fresh pain. The same coworker who had seduced my wife, whose actions shattered my very soul, was now begging me for help. His plea, heavy with desperation, forced me to confront not just his guilt, but my own capacity for forgiveness and healing. 4 days after that call, I wrestled with a tumult of conflicting emotions. I questioned whether I could ever possibly help the man who had been instrumental in my undoing. Every instinct screamed to shut him out, to let him drown in the same regret he had cast upon me. Yet beneath the layers of anger, betrayal, and lingering bitterness, I sensed a raw vulnerability, a glimpse of a man haunted by his own mistakes. I spent long nights pacing in my dimly lit study, the memories of shattered trust and lost years echoing in my mind, while his voice returned in haunting fragments. I need your help. I'm sorry, please, I'm begging you. Ultimately, curiosity and a desire to reclaim some measure of control over my own healing led me to agree to a meeting. I set a time at a quiet, nearly forgotten coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, a setting that seemed to mirror the melancholy of my inner state. As I stepped out into the drizzle, each drop of rain on my face felt like an unwanted reminder of the tears I had shed over lost love and betrayal. The streets, slick and reflective, mirrored my conflicted soul, a kaleidoscope of emotions in a fractured reflection. I arrived to find him waiting in a secluded corner of the cafe, his head bowed and hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The weight of the past hung palpably between us as I took a seat across from him. His eyes, red-rimmed and swollen from sleepless nights, met mine with a pleading that made my heart twist. There was no grand gesture of contrition, no theatrics, just a man stripped of all pretension, exposed by the undeniable pain of his actions. He began haltingly, voice thick with remorse. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know how I got here. At first it was like everything was so exhilarating. I felt powerful, validated even. But then, as the weeks turned to months, the thrill died and I was left with a hollow ache that nothing could fill. I tried to run from it all, but now I'm drowning in guilt. I listened, my emotions a maelstrom of indignation and reluctant empathy. The man before me recounted a life spiraling into chaos, a career that had unraveled as whispers of scandal and suspicion crept into every professional corridor, relationships with friends and family disintegrating under the strain of his duplicity, and a soul burdened by the unbearable weight of his choices. He admitted that the affair, which once offered him a transient escape, had ultimately become a prison of regret. The success he had once imagined turned to ash as he faced the isolation that comes from knowing he had irreparably damaged lives, including his own. I found myself silently questioning, how could I possibly be expected to help the man who had so callously betrayed my trust? In that moment, a flood of memories overwhelmed me, 20 years of shared laughter, quiet evenings spent planning our future, and promises made under starlit skies. All of it had been undone by a single act of treachery. Yet, as I listened to his confession, a subtle truth began to emerge. Bitterness, though justifiable, had slowly become a chain around my own heart, anchoring me to a past that refused to let go. I realized that clinging to vengeance only meant I would forever be a prisoner of my own hurt. After a long silence, I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. I'm not here to absolve you of what you did, I said, my words measured. I can't pretend that the betrayal doesn't exist, or that the scars it left me don't bleed every day. But maybe I can help you find a way out of this darkness. Not for your sake alone but for mine too. Holding on to hate only keeps us both in pain. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I know I don't deserve your help, he murmured, but I'm drowning, and if you could just guide me, if you could show me a path to redemption, I'd be forever in your debt. His voice cracked on the word redemption as though he had not spoken it aloud in years. I spent that afternoon with him, not as an adversary or a vengeful ex, but as someone who had been forced to confront the harsh realities of life and the cost of clinging to past hurts. Over steaming cups of bitter coffee and amidst the soft patter of rain against the window, we discussed practical steps. I offered him the names of a counselor renowned for guiding troubled souls through their darkest times, and I shared contacts of former colleagues who had managed to rebuild their lives after public scandals. We talked about accountability, not just for his actions but for his future choices. I urged him to face the consequences of his decisions head-on, to seek forgiveness from those he had wronged, and to begin the long, arduous work of mending the fractured pieces of his life. In those moments, as I watched him struggle with the enormity of his mistakes, I felt a stirring within me, a cautious hope that perhaps I could reclaim my own life by extending this compassion. I wasn't erasing the past or condoning his actions. I was simply refusing to let the bitterness dictate the course of my future. Helping him became less about absolving him and more about liberating myself from the prison of endless resentment. When we finally parted ways, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle. I walked out into the softened light of early evening, feeling as though I were walking a path lined with both memories of pain and the tentative promise of healing. The encounter had not magically restored what had been lost over 20 years, but it had opened a door, a narrow, uncertain path toward forgiveness, not just of him but of myself. Over the following weeks, our sporadic communications evolved into structured meetings where we discussed progress, setbacks, and the intricacies of rebuilding shattered lives. Each conversation was a mix of raw emotion and deliberate reflection. I began to notice that, in helping him, I was slowly learning to let go of the suffocating grip of anger. The work was not easy. Every step forward was interspersed with painful memories and the occasional resurgence of the old, familiar sting of betrayal. Yet, with every measured stride, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. There were days when I would wake up to a lingering ache in my chest, a stark reminder that 20 years of companionship and love could not be undone in a single day. I attended therapy sessions myself, delving into the deep-seated wounds that had taken root over decades. In those sessions, I learned that forgiveness is not a single moment of absolution but a gradual process of releasing the grip of the past. I came to understand that the act of helping him was, paradoxically, an act of self-healing. I remember one crisp autumn evening when I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, watching leaves drift slowly to the ground. I reflected on the journey I had taken, from the devastation of betrayal to the tentative steps toward rebuilding my own life. The voice of my coworker, now soft and reflective over our phone calls, was no longer a source of searing pain but a symbol of the complexity of human frailty. I realized that our lives, entwined by a fateful betrayal, had taken divergent paths that nonetheless led to a shared destination, the painful yet necessary process of redemption. In time, the sting of his betrayal began to lose its potency, replaced by the understanding that everyone is, in their own way, a work in progress. The man who had once been the architect of my heartbreak was now a mirror, reflecting my own capacity for resilience. I learned that forgiving him did not mean forgetting the past or excusing his actions. It meant reclaiming my power to define my future, free from the corrosive influence of unresolved pain. As months turned into a year, I gradually felt a shift inside me. I still carried the scars of betrayal, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they became the markers of a hard-won journey, a reminder that even in the face of the most profound hurt, the human spirit is capable of renewal. I had reached a point where the bitterness that had once threatened to consume me was now tempered by an acceptance that some wounds, though never fully erased, can evolve into lessons of strength and empathy. I never forgot the man who had once shattered my world, nor the agony of losing a 20-year marriage to deceit. But in extending a tentative hand to him, I discovered that compassion could be the catalyst for personal transformation. I realized that redemption is not granted by others. It is forged in the quiet moments when we choose to let go of our past and step forward into a future built on hope, however fragile it may be. Now, as I look back on that tumultuous chapter of my life, I see it as a crossroads where I chose not to be defined by the pain inflicted by another but to chart a course toward healing and self-discovery. The scars remain, a permanent reminder of betrayal, but they are also the roadmap to resilience, a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can one day transform into the stepping stones of a new beginning. In the end, I learned that sometimes the act of helping the one who once broke you is not an act of weakness, but a profound declaration of strength. I forged my own path to forgiveness, not for his sake alone but for the sake of reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The journey was long, often painful, but in every step I took, I discovered that true healing comes from within. And so, with each new day, I continue to build a future defined not by the ghosts of betrayal, but by the enduring promise of renewal and hope.